Hi everyone, this is Rosie, and today we will learn how to make a boxy bag in any size. So let's get started. I have 5 bags here in 5 different sizes. This is the smallest one that I've made so far. Some people call these boxy bags, some people call them Dopp or makeup bags. And here is the largest one that I've made so far. Now, you might be wondering, do we really need another tutorial on how to make a boxy bag? And I would say probably not. But the focus of this video is on how you can make this boxy bag in any size you desire. And I have developed a worksheet that's going to help you do that. So I have a project worksheet here. This is downloadable, and I will supply the link to this worksheet in the description below the video. So now let's take a look at how to use the worksheet. Here is our project worksheet. You want to make sure that the one that you're using says revised on it. Now, I have said that the bags are best suited for non-directional woven fabrics. Actually, you can make this out of anything you want, but if you're using a printed fabric, you do want it to be non-directional. Right here I have a diagram that shows what each measurement represents. So this is the zipper, and parallel to the zipper is going to be your length. From side to side, that is going to be the width of the bag, and then from the bottom to the top, that's going to be the height of the bag. So in this video, I want to make a bag that's 9 inches long by 5 inches wide by 5 inches high. So I'm just going to plug those numbers in right here. I have 9 inches for my length, 5 inches for my width, and 5 inches for my height. Now, these two measurements do not have to be the same, the width and the height. You could have a width of 6 and a height of 5. It's up to you. But as far as the width is concerned, I would keep that to no less than 2 inches. Now, you need to choose your seam allowance. I recommend a seam allowance that is 0.5 inches or 1/2 of an inch. And I write right here, I recommend a seam allowance of 1/2 of an inch, and use this seam allowance in all calculations. So any of the calculations that you're doing on this worksheet, you want to use the 1/2 inch or whatever you've chosen. Now, all of these calculations are based on using either a number 4.5 or a number 5 zipper. Those zippers have a tape width of 1.25 inches, and the seam allowance for sewing in your zipper is going to be 1/4 of an inch. And again, you only want to use the 0.5 or 1/2 inch seam allowance in the calculations. You are not going to use the 1/4 inch seam allowance in any of the calculations. As I already said, the width of your bag should not be less than 2 inches, and that's because you're working with a zipper tape that's 1.25 inches wide. If you were going to make the bag 1 inch wide, that really wouldn't work out very well. Here is a little diagram showing the orientation of your fabric after it's been cut out with the zipper sewn in. So you will have 1/2 of your zipper sewn in on this side and 1/2 of your zipper sewn in on this side. When you're cutting out your fabric, you're going to be making a vertical cut and a horizontal cut. The zipper needs to be sewn in on the vertical cut. If you sew it in on the horizontal side, you're not going to get the right size bag. So here I have calculations for your cutting measurements. So for your vertical cut, you want to plug in the length, which is 9 inches. And then you're going to add to that the height of the bag, which is 5 inches. And then you're going to add in your seam allowance times 2. So a 1/2 inch times 2 is 1 inch. You're going to add these numbers up. They add up to 15. So that means your vertical cut needs to be 15 inches. For the horizontal cut, you're going to take the width times 2. So the width is 5 times 2, that's 10, plus the height times 2. So the height is 5 times 2 is 10, but then you're going to subtract off of that 1/4 of an inch. So 10 minus 1/4 of an inch is 9.75. And that adds up to 19.75 inches. So once you're done with your cutting, you should have a piece of fabric that is 15 inches on the vertical side and 19.75 inches on the horizontal side. And here I have a little diagram showing the orientation of your bag when you're ready to cut out your boxed corners. So I have these boxed corners drawn in red. Now nothing here is to scale, it's just a diagram. So right along here, that would be the folds of the fabric for both your exterior and your interior. These are the cutouts for the corners on both sides, and again you have the folds on this side. You have the raw edges of your bag right here with your seam lines sewn in, and then your zipper is sewn in right down the middle, and it's also parallel to the length. And here I have another diagram showing one of the box corners. You will need two measurements to cut out those corners. One of them will be along this axis right here, and that measurement is going to be taken from the raw edge. So here would be the raw edge of your bag. You're going to be measuring in this way. So the measurement from the raw edge is going to be the height divided by 2. Our height is 5 inches, so 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. And then the second measurement that you need is going to be in from the folds. So that would be right here. So the measurement from the folds is going to be the height divided by 2, which is 2.5, minus our seam allowance, which is a ½ inch. So that's going to be 2.0 inches. So what this is telling us is that we will be measuring 2.5 inches from the raw edge and then 2 inches up from the fold to cut out our boxed corners. Let's take a look at the materials that I will be using in the video. I will be using 100% cotton quilting fabric for both my exterior and my interior pieces. I'm going to interface my exterior piece with some Pellon 987F, and I will be interfacing my lining with some Pellon SF101, which is a woven interfacing. I'm using a number 4.5 zipper, and I have here a friction pen for my marking tool. Now if you decide to use one of these, remember that while the ink will disappear with heat, it can come back with cold, so always be careful where you use this for marking. You'll need a pair of scissors plus a rotary cutter along with a rotary cutting ruler and mat. I will be using wonder clips, a point turner, a seam ripper, and for my thread I'm just using a general all-purpose thread. This one is from Aurifil, and it's a 50 weight. Again, you can use whatever fabrics and interfacings you want for your bag. I'm going to go ahead now and interface my fabrics and cut out my pieces. I have my exterior and interior pieces cut to size, and they have already been interfaced. I've also cut out 2 pieces that I'm going to use for my zipper tabs. I've cut these 3 inches wide by 4 inches high, and then I have 4 more strips of fabric that I'm going to use for binding the inside seams. These strips are 2 inches wide by about 6 inches high. Now keep in mind that there are many ways to construct this bag. This is just one of the ways, and I do like to finish the interior seams with either binding or French seams. If you decide that you would like to finish your bag with French seams, I do recommend a 5/8 inch seam allowance in your calculations. In this step, we will be installing the zipper. If you look at your project worksheet, remember we have a horizontal cut and a vertical cut. The zipper must be sewn in on the vertical cut. If you put the zipper in on the horizontal side, you're going to get a different size bag. So the first thing that I do is fold it so that the 2 vertical sides are together. And then I just want to find the center on each side, so I just fold it in half like this and make a small clip. Then go ahead and do it on the other side as well. And now I'm clipping the opposite end. And then I'll do the same thing to my lining piece. Fold it in half, bringing the 2 vertical sides together. And clip the center right here. Then go ahead and do it on the other side as well. Now I'm going to place the zipper so that the right side of the zipper is facing the right side of the fabric, and we're clipping along that vertical end. After clipping in place, we're going to sew straight across with a 1/4 inch seam. Then we will take our lining piece and clip the lining so that it's right sides together with the exterior and the zipper sandwiched in between. If you want to sew everything together at the same time, that's fine, but you can only do it for this side because we're going to do something different on the other side of the zipper. I'm sewing on a Juki DX4000 QVP, which is also known as the Kokochi. I will be sewing the zipper in place with a stitch length of 3.0 and a seam allowance of 1/4 of an inch. And you do want to backstitch at both ends. And try and keep a true 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to clip the lining to the opposite side of the zipper, and then we can sew it together. Here I have clipped my exterior and lining sides, right sides together with the zipper sandwiched in between. And now we're going to sew straight across, and we're going to stitch right on top of that previous line of stitching. Try and stay on that line of stitching the best you can. And you do want to backstitch at both ends. Place your exterior and lining sides, wrong sides together. Make sure that all of these edges are even, including the bottom edge. Then you're going to press both the exterior and lining side away from the zipper and top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of this seam line right here. After you're done with that, we're going to take the exterior and clip it to the opposite side of the zipper. So the right side of the exterior, once again, is going to be clipped to the right side of the zipper. But do not sew in the lining at the same time. I'm top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the edge with a stitch length of 3.4 and do back stitch at each end. I have the other end of the exterior clipped to the opposite side of the zipper with right sides together. You want to make sure that all of these edges right here are even. Now I'm going to flip this over and sew from the zipper side, and I will be sewing straight across with a 1/4 inch seam and a stitch length of 3.0. And do back stitch at both ends. We're ready to sew the other end of the lining to the opposite side of the zipper. So you're going to have the right side of the lining against the wrong side of the zipper. So go ahead and clip it in place. You want to have your side edges nice and even. Now that I have it clipped, I'm going to turn it so that I have the exterior side facing up. We're going to sew over our previous line of stitching again, but we're not going to sew all the way across. We want to leave an opening right in the center here for turning the project right side out. So I like to sew in maybe about 3.5–4 inches, It really depends on the size of the bag that I'm working on. So I'm just going to make a little mark just so that I know where to start and stop my sewing. And this area right here I'm going to leave open. Once again, I'm sewing over that previous line of stitching with a stitch length of 3.0. I am going to backstitch at each end. And I'm approaching that mark that I made right here. So I will backstitch at that spot. And now I'm going to start where I made that second mark. Backstitch, and then I'll sew off to the end. I've sewn up to the marking from each end, and now if I turn this over, you're going to see that we've left an opening in our lining right here. Now I'm going to reach in and open that zipper all the way. And then after opening it up, I want to turn the piece so the exterior and the lining sides are facing wrong sides together. Now that I have my exterior and lining sides wrong sides together, I want to press both sides away from that zipper seam. Where the opening is, I'm just going to turn that under 1/4 of an inch. After everything is pressed into place, we're going to top stitch from the edge to where I made that mark, and we'll do the same thing on the opposite side, but we're not going to top stitch all along the edge where that opening is. Here is the exterior and the lining sides pressed away from that zipper seam. Here's my opening with that seam allowance pressed under 1/4 of an inch. Now I've placed pins in where that opening begins and ends. We're going to top stitch out from the edge to the pin, and then we will do the same thing on the other side. We'll top stitch from the pin out to the edge. I'm top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the edge with a stitch length of 3.4, and I will back stitch. Now I will sew right up to that pin and backstitch. Then I'll scoot over to the other side where the other pin is and do the same thing. Backstitch. And backstitch again. I'm ready to prepare my zipper tabs. This is my 4-inch side and this is my 3-inch side. I'm going to fold them in half, wrong sides together, bringing these long edges together and press. Then I'll open it up and I'll bring each one of these edges into the middle and press, bring the second one into the middle and press. Then I'm going to fold the entire piece in half, bringing those folds together and press. After I have everything in place, I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from each of these long edges with a stitch length of 3.4. This is going to give me zipper tabs that are 3/4 of an inch wide. And then you'll prepare your second one in exactly the same way. And I'm going to go ahead and do my top stitching off camera. It's time to sew the sides of the bag together. We're going to do this by first bringing the lining and the exterior sides right sides together. So you're going to flip everything. And now we have the exterior and the lining right sides together. And we're going to close the zipper up all the way. So here is my zipper. I have it completely closed. Now we're going to fold this so that the lining side is right sides together with itself, and the exterior side is also right sides together with itself. And where we made these notches at the beginning of the video, we want to take those center notches and match them up with the zipper. So the notch will be placed right in the center of that zipper there. And then you're going to clip it in place. And then you'll do the same thing on the other side where the lining is. Match up the notch with the center of the zipper and clip in place. We'll do the same thing on this side. I'm matching the notch up with the center of the zipper. And then I'll do the same thing on the exterior side, matching the notch with the center of the zipper. Now the folded edges of your exterior and your lining should be even with each other. So you just want to smooth everything out, make sure that they're nice and even. I like to put a couple of clips just to hold everything in place. If they're not even with each other, you'll probably have to do a little bit of wiggling and adjusting. So here's this side right here. And then we will put another clip in on this side right here. And one thing that I like to do is mark my seam allowance, so I'm just going to draw some quick lines here. This is optional. And I just feel a little more confident. I like the result I get better when I actually mark my seam line. I don't do this on every single project, but this one is small enough that I think it's worth doing. Before I sew up these side seams, I like to cut out my boxed corners. So to do that, we're going to take a look at the worksheet. This diagram right here reflects what we have on our workspace. We have the folds right here, the seam lines, the zipper is down the center, and these red boxes signify where our boxed corners are going to be. So I'm measuring 2.5 inches in from the edge right here, and then 2 inches up from the fold. And then I'm going to mark the box. Now I'm marking on the lining side. You can mark each side individually if you want. I usually just mark from one side and I cut out both the exterior and the lining together. So again, from here I'm going in 2.5 inches from the raw edge and then 2 inches up from the fold. Then I'll flip this around and mark the boxes on the other side. And after I have them marked, I actually always go ahead and double check them before I cut anything out. I've double checked all of my measurements and I've added in some extra clips just to keep everything nice and secure while I'm cutting. So I'm going to go ahead now and just cut them all out. Now the last thing to do before sewing the seams is to insert our zipper tabs. So you want to have the exterior side facing up. You'll just fold the tab in half. You're going to insert the folded end, and it needs to go on top of the right side of the zipper. So just put it in, get it to be about even with the edge of the side here, and then just put a little clip to hold it in place. For this side, you do need to open up your zipper far enough so that the zipper does not get caught in the seam out here. So just push it down and then fold the zipper tab in half and slip it inside. I'm sewing the side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a stitch length 3.0. I will back stitch at both ends, and I will be sewing over my zipper. Now, you never ever ever want to sew over metal zipper teeth. And you'll probably want to make sure that your machine is able to sew over the zipper teeth before giving this a try. When I get to the zipper, I do back stitch over that. So you've got your zipper tab there. You want to make sure that everything is nice and secure. And then back stitch again. Then you can scoot over to the other side and sew this seam in exactly the same way. Go ahead and trim the ends of the zipper even with the edge of the bag. Now we can turn this right side out. You want to find the end that has your opening, and here is mine. This is what it will look like from the opposite side. And the other thing that you want to do is just reach into one of these corners here and open up your zipper the rest of the way. You can also get it from right here. Here's your zipper, you can just push it. And now we're going to turn this right side out so that the exterior and the lining sides are wrong sides together. Smooth everything out, and you can go ahead and give all of these side seams a nice pressing. I like to press mine down with some steam, and I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. Don't press these folds here, just press your side seams. We need to close up this opening right here, and we're going to close it up by top stitching across the exterior. So I like to take a piece of double-sided adhesive tape, and I'm going to stick it onto the zipper right below the seam line. Just like this. Then I'll remove the release paper, and I'm going to adhere that lining to the zipper. We're going to sew this closed by top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the zipper seam. You want to make sure that it looks nice and straight. I like to use this method of turning when I'm making a larger bag. When I'm making a smaller bag, it's a little harder to do the top stitching, but it's actually not impossible because I've done it many times. If you don't want to use adhesive tape, you could also just hold everything in place with some clips. Now we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. I will be top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the edge with a stitch length of 3.4, and I'm going to drop my needle right down where this stitch ends from the top stitching that we did earlier. So I will go ahead and position that under my presser foot and drop my needle down. And I'm going to stitch forward a few stitches and then backwards a few stitches. And then I'll top stitch straight across. Now I'm approaching the end of the top stitching that we did previously. I'm going to stitch right up to that point and then back stitch. Then you just want to check and make sure that you've caught the lining in your top stitching. For the final step, we're ready to box our corners. So you're going to turn this so that the lining is facing right side out. You'll smooth everything out. Make sure that everything is laying nice and flat the way it's supposed to. And then you want to line up these boxed corners so that the edges are even with each other. And right where this fold is, I just make a little snip so that I can align this with my seam line. And I do that on all 4 corners. After you're done clipping all those folds, you're going to spread your corner out just like this. You want to match the notch up with your seam right here. So match that up. I like to put a clip on each end here. And then I'm also going to put a few clips along the seam, but before I do that, I actually do like to mark in my 1/2 inch seam allowance. And finish clipping in place. Go ahead and prepare the other 3 corners in exactly the same way, and then we can go ahead and sew them together. Now I'm simply going to sew each corner closed with a seam allowance of 1/2 of an inch and a stitch length of 3.0, and I will back stitch at each end. In this last step, we are ready to sew in our bindings. I've already bound one of the corners here. You can see the finished result. Now, some people are dead set against binding, but I'm going to tell you that the binding is like the skeleton of the bag. It gives it structure so that it stands up. Once you put all your stuff in the bag, you're not going to see the binding anyway. So what I like to do is first trim down my seams to 3/8 of an inch. So I'll do that right here. And that's, of course, assuming you're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to take my binding. My bindings are 2 inches wide, and they need to be as long as your seam with a little bit of extra. You want a little bit of overhang on each side. And I like to place the binding on this side right here where the seam is. And then I'm just going to line up the edges. And once I have the binding clipped into place, you're going to sew it on here by following your previous line of stitching. And I'm going to do that off camera, and I will still use a stitch length of 3.0. I have the binding sewn into place. You want to press it away from that seam line, then flip it over. And you want to fold both of these ends in, just like this, and press. Then you want to fold this raw edge right down to this raw edge, just like that, and press. And then you want to take this folded edge and bring it over that seam line. It should be covering your seam line there. You'll hold it in place with a couple of clips. And then we're going to sew it from this side by stitching in the ditch. And the ditch is this space right here where that seam line is. We'll go ahead and do that together. I'm stitching in the ditch with a stitch length of 3.0, and I will back stitch at both ends. So the ditch is this space right in here. And after you're done, you just want to turn it over and make sure that you cut the binding in the stitching line on this side. Then go ahead and finish your other corners the same way, and then turn your bag right side out. Here is the bag all completed. I finished sewing in my bindings, I turned it right side out, and I gave it a little bit of a pressing. If I open it up, you're going to see a nice smooth lining inside, no seam down the center. And I want to show you, if I close this up here, I'm pounding on this pretty hard. It's not collapsing because the binding is giving it structure. Now, we set out to make a bag that was 9 inches long, 5 inches wide, and 5 inches high. So let's see how we did. Now I want you to keep in mind that when your bag is done, it might not be to the exact measurements. And that's because there are a lot of factors that are in here. One is when you cut out the fabrics. If you did not cut them true to size, it could be off a little bit. Your seam allowances matter, and you also have to think about the bulk of the materials that you're using. When you turn your seams right side out, they take up a little bit of space. But regardless of all of that, let's see how we did here. So I'm just going to try and go from seam to seam, and I have just about 9 inches there. Looks like it's right at 9 inches. Now I'm going to measure from side to side, and again we have about 4 7/8 inches there, so we're very, very close. And there's a lot of bulk in these seams, so that's taking up some of the space. And then for the height, let's just measure along this seam line here. and we're, again, just a little bit shy of 5 inches. We're about at 4 7/8 inches. So overall, the bag turned out just how we wanted it to be. So I do hope that this has been helpful to you. I hope that you will give that worksheet a try. Let me know how it works out for you. In the meantime, I want to thank everyone who has supported me by subscribing to my channel and liking my videos. I would love to see you over at my Facebook group, which is Rosie and David Patterns. I will also put a link to my Etsy shop where you can go and check out all of my many patterns. Thanks for watching and have a great day.